Hello, this is Cyrus coming at you from the abyss of darkness in some mysterious location. I don't even know where I am. But we're doing the class today on Oliver Lodge, so it should be fun. Hopefully this video works. The last one didn't record, so if you're watching this, I guess it did record. So let me just pull up the page that I'll be talking about. Here we are. All right, so Oliver Lodge. So actually, let me just real quick, so I can see you guys on the screen. By a show of hands, who here knows who Oliver Lodge is? Nobody. Michelle, I can't see your hand because you're
I'm dialed in.
Okay, but do you know who Oliver Lodge is?
Who is? I can't even hear you. What?
Oliver Lodge. Can everybody hear me? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, I think I've.
Get my glasses on.
Okay, it's okay. All right, so nobody knows who Oliver Lodge is. Well, so this would be kind of fun. So, Lodge is one of these characters who, it's really interesting in this field is that people don't sometimes realize to what extent powerful historical names were interested in subjects, whether it's ITC or, seances, whatever it might be. I've talked before about, of course, Nikola Tesla, Thomas Edison, but, back then there was a whole string of scientists. So, imagine top scientists today. Who do we think of? Who's the top scientists of, of course, Stephen Hawking, the late Stephen Hawking. The people of that caliber from back then were heavily involved in all of this. So Lodge was essentially one of the pioneers, or actually I think the pioneer of radio. So let's go ahead and read off his bio. I'm getting an internet unstable sign. Can you guys hear me okay? All right, testing. Can you guys hold on one second? I have no idea if you guys can hear me or not because I got an internet connection unstable thing. So I'm just gonna hold on a second and wait. Testing. Can you guys hear me? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
we're okay. Looks like we're back. Let me double check and make sure that it's still recording. Okay, it's still. Is it recording? Let me check. Okay, it is still recording. Okay, great. Yeah, I had a temporary just blip on the connection. Guess I should be expecting that to happen. Yeah. Okay, the internet's been fine, and then now finally class is going, and it's giving me problems. Okay. Anyway, so here's about again about what I was saying was it's amazing the caliber of scientists that not everybody is even aware of. So Lodge studied at the Royal College of Science at University College. Achieved his DSc in 1877. By 1861, professor of physics and mathematics at Liverpool. In 1884, he joined the Society for Psychic Research, not because he liked the subject, but as he notes in his autobiography, because he had found a series of facts that were unpalatable and mainly neglected by scientific men and felt them worthy of attention. He also contributed to the popular scientific magazine Nature, which we know as Nature is a journal. He was later knighted in 1902, when he had already served for a year as president of the SPR by then. Then he became president of the British Association. So basically he was interested, probably as with others, as with Gordon, what was his name? I'm sorry, Hodgson, who we spoke about last class, came in as a skeptic and slowly evolved from that position. President of the Physical Society, the British Association, the Rontgen Society, and SPR. And he's done a lot more than just this. So I like to find like a proper bio of him because he was heavily involved in pioneering various areas of the modern world that we know of today. So in addition to this, there's a okay. Here's a good little blip. Sir Oliver Lodge sent a radio message 1 year before Marconi did. So that means is that some would argue Lodge was the pioneer of radio. So he created radio essentially. Many people were competing to be the first to be able to send invisible waves through space, and Lodge was the first, I suppose. And that also relates to people's interest in like paranormal stuff because now we're getting into the beginnings of, I guess, like non-material physics. So those who are pioneering radio are the ones able to begin speculating, hey, if there's things like this interacting in our universe that we can't see, but they have an effect on our world, what else might be affecting our world? So I'm just going to read up some of his writing. So Lodge, basically during this side interest he had in life after death, he put out many papers that people still cite today. And kind of the very interesting thing, but also the really sad thing, is that when you read this stuff, you'll find it's like it's the same arguments, the same stuff that we still argue about today. So the question is, has nothing really changed in 120 years? Is there still the same debate back and forth between materialists and non-materialists? Like the same stuff that people argue about on like the Project Consciousness forums is still the same stuff that people were arguing about back then in letters, magazines, and public debates. So it is kind of sad that nothing's changed at all. So let's go down to some of his philosophies about survival, which is how the terminology people used back then. This is kind of interesting. So he talks about what is direct evidence of survival. So it says, survival, however, is not to be established on grounds of analogy or by arguments of probability. It must be proven by direct experience. So that's very interesting. I mean, I guess I agree, but I mean, I also think that, a case can be made with probability or, philosophy, but, and also scientific experiment as well. But, he's talking about direct experience, which is ultimately the main focus, because at the end of the day, you have to have that direct experience to put a lot of these pieces together. I mean, some people can without that, but, individuals who have died must demonstrate their continued existence by trustworthy evidence. That may not be easy. It might not be possible. Experience must be the judge. We cannot decide what is possible or impossible except by trial. Those who have studied the matter consider that the evidence is good and that some individuals have proven their survival. That is to say, they have demonstrated that their individual mind and character has survived the death of the material organism in which they were at one time incorporated. We need not suppose that they are divorced from the physical universe as disembodied ghosts. So I kind of like this because, this is 120 years ago, and he's basically ranting about the same stuff that people like me, not that I would compare myself to somebody like him, but in the same topic that I bring up, why do people go on about disembodied ghosts, rattling chains? So all that superstition was big in 1902, just as in many ways it's just as big today. Now it comes in the form of horror films and pop culture, but back then it was no less prevalent. And he is obviously could tell the big difference between pop culture and the way things really work. So he goes on, their physical existence may be just as real and substantial as ever, only they are no longer associated with matter. I would say with our matter. It's a bit of a distinction. But then matter is not the only entity. There may be others that are more universal and more continuous and have far more perfect mechanisms, which it may be presumed they still inhibit and utilize. The strength of, okay, so this is interesting. The strength of materialism remains, but in a glorified form. The theory takes a more comprehensive view of the universe than the narrow materialist worldview. The facts, the new and as yet unorthodox facts, range themselves on the side of a larger truth. So this is again depressing to me. So he says the facts and the new and as yet unorthodox. So he says as yet. Do you think Oliver Lodge had any idea that 120 years ago, as yet would still be going on? Because some of these guys really thought that all of this was going to burst out, into the open. That, by 1910, they really thought by 1930, by 1940, like this would all be like mainstream. And what are we saying today? Like we're saying by 2030, 2040, hey, all this stuff has to be out in the open and fully embraced. I don't know, because it kind of seems like we've been saying that for a while, haven't we? And discountenance any narrow views based upon too limited experience or too hasty prejudice. A study of those facts of psychic experience is just as important as a study of the behavior of material organisms, and in due time they will attract some of the concentrated attention now devoted to other branches of knowledge. Well, is that the case? I mean, I guess in the modern age we can say that psychic subjects, people like Dean Radin, I mean, there is a level of pervasiveness. I mean, we do see laboratory experiments. We do see a level of acceptance, but I don't think it's quite what some of these guys thought, would have been, especially after like 120 years. Okay, so it goes on. A study of those facts of psychic experience is just as important as a study of the behavior of material organisms in due time. Some of the constant attention now devoted to other branches of knowledge will also be applied. So a working hypothesis capable of assimilating these ideas with a natural knowledge in general may be helpful. However, much may have to be modified, extended, and replaced by something better. I guess that's what the big issue is that nobody wants to replace what they all decided back in the Enlightenment was the way of existence. And Lodge believed that, however uncomfortable, the purity of science would at the end win out, and people would have to inevitably replace facts, even with uncomfortable ones, to seek out the way facts, objectivity, and truth really is. So a very optimistic model, because it turned out he was completely wrong. And that's not what we did. Instead, the whole subject became derided through a large-scale disinformation effort. And after the early 1900s, people forgot about all of this up until the New Age movement, up until the 60s and 70s. So instead of this stuff catching fire, it was basically suppressed, denigrated, and destroyed. Okay, so he quotes a guy named Thomas Henry Huxley. I don't know who that is. Maybe in 1902 they knew who he was, but Huxley said, "Science seems to me to teach in the highest, strongest manner the great truth which is embodied in the Christian conception of entire surrender to the will of God. Sit down before fact as a little child. Be prepared to give up every preconceived notion. Follow humbly wherever and to whatever abysses nature leads, or you shall learn nothing. I have only begun to learn content and peace of mind since I have resolved at all risks to do this." I think some people would cringe at the Christian concept, but that makes a lot of sense. And, I guess it's a very lofty view of science and something that basically has been lost. I mean, I think in another lifetime I could have maybe gone into science. I was really into science when I was a kid, when I was in high school and university. I was reading medical textbooks age 5. Everyone thought I was going to be a doctor, but it's kind of sad. But I think one big reason I didn't go down that path is even at adolescent, I knew about all this stuff. Like I was reading about this kind of stuff, and I thought, man, science is an institution, and it's completely dogmatic, and they don't care about the truth. They don't care about facts, and I'm not going to do it. And so I ended up getting a useless liberal arts degree, but that's just my kind of crazy way of looking at things. Anyways, let's look at another article by Lodge. What science means for man, life, mind, and matter. So let's read off some of what he wrote in this article. So there are three things partly within and partly beyond human reach: truth, goodness, and beauty. All are necessary for completeness, and a being in whom they all reach perfection would be what we call divine. But without limited capabilities, few of us can do more than aim at one of them. Though if we are to retain the open mind, we may hope that by faithful effort in one direction, something of the two others may be added onto us as well. Basically, he's talking about those things that we can't always measure. We can't just process through the materialistic way of looking at life. We need this combination of kind of spiritual, philosophical subjects to make us feel complete. Fair enough. I understand. I can jive with that. So he talks again about the aim of science. Direct aim of science is truth, and the temptation of its devotees is to concentrate too narrowly on this one aim and lose sight of the wealth of existence, which gives all the meaning and value to bare fact, thus gaining but a purblind, it's an old word, view of the universe in spite of a large accumulation of knowledge, which is accurate as far as it goes, but so incomplete as regards the totality of things to be liable to be misled. But such narrow students of science are not philosophers. They may pose as such occasionally and be loud in the negation of everything outside their own range. But true philosophy must take a wider view. It must open its eaves in every direction and seek to comprehend the length and breadth and depth and height, and to interpret something of the great reality which passes knowledge. So basically, Lodge is ranting about, again, the same issue today, which is scientism. So you have scientists who are not really scientists, but philosophers who are presenting philosophical arguments, painting them as being scientific, and then using that to push an agenda. That's the same issue we see today. So we see this in many areas. Of course, we see this in survival science. And back then, it was just as big of a problem, and probably much worse. Back then, Lodge discovers radio waves. And back then, they were deriding him as being, full of shit, because they didn't believe that there could be these invisible waves you could tap into and use them to communicate. It's utterly, ridiculous. So now I'm using Wi-Fi, which I'm sure, Corey, you can argue what the difference is between the radio signals and how that could have developed toward Wi-Fi. I'm sure I'm not completely off base here, but the point is that that discovery led to the modern world we have today, and Lodge put up with all the same people saying things like survival is impossible. We're the same people telling him that radio communication is impossible. So he became very jaded about all of this. Looking around then on existence with eyes clouded a little by special study, but as widely open as we can get them, what do we see? We see an unbounded universe of space containing spherical masses of matter, some hot and glowing, some dark and cool, distributed not at random but obedient to law and order. Maybe astronomers will definitely disagree and say that it all just exploded out into random directions. But even back then, it's I don't know if in 1902 they had a different conception, or if cosmology was less rigid. I don't know. Examining matter more closely with the help of instruments of precision, we find it consists of atoms of known size and behavior. Interesting. So very true, even 120 years later. And we find also these ultimate atoms of matter are not really ultimate, but are composed of something else. This is kind of interesting, something that we call electricity. So I think it's really interesting when he says that this ultimate substance of atoms are ultimately not ultimate, but composed of something else finer. So this is, decades before Einstein. This is decades before quantum physics. And Lodge is postulating the existence of quantum physics. So it tells you something about kind of the intellectual ability of this guy. And back then, the idea of quantum physics would be pseudoscience. And this electricity also exists. This is perfect. This electricity also exists in little specks, which appear to imitate the larger masses in their regular motions, and which display or reach the beautiful law and order in the very interior of the atom. So basically, now he's talking about quantum quarks, like subatomic particles that also behave in kind of like these, some would argue, very structured ways. And again, long before the innovation of quantum physics, he's talking about basically what we later know as electrons, and then digging down into quarks and essentially quantum physics. I wonder what Lodge would think of things like the double slit experiment. Then we come to investigate the intermediate region of apparently empty space. We find that it is not empty, but contains something that welds all the separate fragments of matter into a cosmic whole, and also that it carries vibrations and transmits force from one to another. And all this study of matter and ether, with its extraordinary ramifications, belongs to the science of physics, or as it used to be called, natural philosophy. So back then, the theory of ether was really popular. It was basically they were finding that experiments that people can still perform today. And there was a really cool scientist or scientific writer named Richard Milton. I don't know if he's still around or still alive. He used to have he had a book called Alternative Science, and he kind of re-argued a case for ether, showing that you can still do scientific experiments to show that there's an invisible layer that permeates all of reality, and it's tangible enough that you can shoot specks of light through it, and that light will actually become refracted or will change shape when it's passing through this invisible barrier. And so back then they were doing it, they were calling it ether, and thus we have also, led to the references of the other side as being, an element of this. Therefore, the other side is etheric. So kind of this goes on, and he talks about, a little bit about the evolution of the mind, existence, philosophy. He asks, how can we acquiesce in the materialism of science, or justify the scientific man in excluding from his attention so many aspects of the universe and attending to the laws of forces and the motion of matter? The answer is because that is his ultimate because that is his proper business, and because the whole of nature is obedient to these fundamental laws, no matter what other laws it also may be obedient to. Exclusion from attention is perfectly legitimate if it assists the business in hand and has no sort of connection with a materialistic philosophy, which affirms some things and denies others. So what he's saying is that when the materialists say that something cannot exist, the facts don't care. So the facts don't care about your materialistic philosophy. If people are encountering deceased loved ones in seance rooms and it's really happening, the facts of this universe, of the cosmos, that has nothing to do with philosophy, because there is an objective truth to reality. And so materialists can go jump off a cliff, to my interpretation of what Lodge is talking about. So he talks about the nature of life, which, I think this is kind of fun. What then do we know about this organizing principle that we call life exceedingly little? Do you think Lodge knew that in 120 years we could say the same thing, same sentence? What do we know about the organizing principle we call life exceedingly little? We don't, go take college biology, and Michelle, maybe you can attest to this. And we don't know about, so we'll learn about Krebs cycle. We'll learn about mitosis, cytosis. We don't know about is the overarching ability that, biological mechanisms can do these things. Like, why? If you keep asking that why question, nothing makes sense after a while. So the living organism was shown by Pasteur to be responsible for a good many processes which up to his time had been regarded as merely chemical. Chemical they still are, but guided in curious fashion. So this is also really interesting. So before we knew about like cellular division, before we knew about biology affecting everything, materialism was still around in the form of, I guess we could call it like chemicalism. So it's the idea is like, yeah, we don't really know how how fingernails grow, but it's probably chemical. There's probably some random chemical reaction that does this or that, and then it causes the fingernails to grow. Whatever, it's all materialistic, etc. So back then, if we go back from this point 100 years further back, that's how people were thinking. It was chemicalism. And then we discovered that everything is like interconnected life, like tiny, tiny, tiny individual organisms all synchronized together and acting as one, which is kind of crazy and borderline like spiritual or philosophical or, wild or woo-woo. And yet now that's just what we understand about existence and life and biology, and that's how we get our vaccinations, and that's how we know about sicknesses. And I mean, that's the way existence is. But if you told a chemicalist that, they'd think you were crazy. There's no way that billions of individual tiny organisms make up the human body. That's crazy talk. What is this new age nonsense you're giving me? So about matter, the vehicle of the mind. Matter is the instrument and vehicle of mind. Incarnation is the mode by which mind interacts with the present familiar scheme of things, and thereby the element of guidance is supplied. It can, in fact, be embodied in an intelligent arrangement of inert, inorganic matter. Even a mountain path is a concrete expression of something human. It's able to guide and has direction. So now he's tackling the mind-brain issue, which, again, is still a big issue today. He's saying that, even something that looks inert and physicalist, a brain, is actually likely a representation of something that is on a much higher scale that we would call mind. So again, what we say today, we look at people who philosophize about that as being kind of like cutting edge technology. Hi. Good? Doing good? Okay, good. Making sure security doesn't kick me out. Looks like they're happy. I think the gentleman was just curious what my lecture was about. Old Vietnamese guy. Maybe he understands English and was curious about the metaphysics. But anyway, what was I saying? Right, so today, talking about that, it's like so cutting edge. It's like, wow, this is what Rupert Sheldrake thinks, or what Dean Radin thinks. But, somebody like Lodge was making the same theories about mind and matter way back then. Lastly, grades of incarnation. There are grades of incarnation. The most thorough kind is that illustrated by our bodies. In them we are incarnate, but probably not even in that case is the incarnation complete. It is quite credible that our whole and entire personality is never terrestrial manifested. This indeed is part of the doctrine of the subliminal self. So now Lodge is jumping into the idea that we're multidimensional. We probably have versions of us, parts of us that live in other dimensions. Like I always talk about the astral parallel self. We're not merely confined just to this dimension, but there are subliminal selves, higher dimensional selves. Basically, when you look at somebody, you're looking at one tiny piece of a much bigger spectrum. Lodge knew about this back then because, for one thing, Lodge was communicating with people on the other side. And even back then, communications back then were presenting information that is still relevant today and also highly, very, very deep. So, back then, communications, those on the other side were saying the same things that we talk about today as cutting edge concepts. So Jens, are we so sure that when we truly attribute a sunset or the moonlight rippling on a lake to the chemical and physical action of material forces, to the vibrations of matter and ether, as we know them, we have exhausted the whole truth of things? Many a thinker brooding over the phenomena of nature has felt that they represent the thoughts of a dominating unknown, mind partially incarnate in it all. It's not nice when you look at a beautiful sunset and you think, well, this is just chemical reactions, randomness, and nothing of significance. It really takes away from the beauty of life when we're stuck in materialism. I think Lodge is warning about that. So, yep, I wanted to read off a couple of these articles. I think that's actually it. So for discussion, what do you guys think about how 120 years later, it's the same stuff? On one hand, I think it's really cool that the same, like, very same ideas can, be reflected way back then. But it's also kind of sad that it's the same ideas being debated from way back then, and people don't even know about it. People don't even know that 120 years ago, this is the stuff being published and mocked. Just like today, Rupert Sheldrake or Dean Radin or somebody comes up with something written in a similar way as this, becomes really popular in like esoteric circles, and then mainstream scientists mock and deride it. Same thing. Pretty crazy. Otherwise, what do you guys think about Lodge, pioneer of radio? I'm going to stop the share and turn it over to you guys. Anybody have any thoughts about that? Anybody? Not everybody all at once.
Fascinating. What'd you say, 120 years ago?
Yeah, well, am I doing the math right? Like 117 years, maybe like 1902?
Fascinating.
Yeah. So it's just interesting. It's this, same stuff.
Yeah.
1902, same discussions, same debates, same problems. What the heck?
I love it.
Anybody have any opinions about any of these concepts, or like? I was kind of curious what you thought, Michelle, since you have 1 foot in material science and 1 foot out of it. But if you don't have anything to say, I'm going to put you on the spot. But
No, I'm just like trying to drive and do.
Oh no, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to put you at risk again with driving and doing this.
It's just the same thing. It's just like when, the world is flat and the world is not flat. There's always going to be heckling and whatever about new theories. Even in my stuff that I do, people come out with new stuff, and of course everybody looks at it as like, oh, that can't work. No. This is ridiculous. And then come to find out that it actually is a cure or something like that. In the scientific world. But it is quite amazing that some of the things that we talk about now were discussed way back when. And even like this work from Tesla, that he did things way back then and people just didn't believe it and didn't have the funding to continue with it. And actually we're doing it now. So it's just an amazing journey.
So do we think that the reason Lodge basically pioneered radio, but everybody said Lodge was a maniac because how can invisible stuff interact with us? Can we manipulate it? But then I guess the reason that this became accepted is that once you can make a device, and then the military looks at it and says, we can communicate. Troops here can communicate with troops up there, and we better take this seriously. So is that how these normal ideas end up revolutionizing things, and is the reason that this stuff, never has taken off because it doesn't have to? Because I think remote viewing has practical applications. So it's kind of like maybe because it's just too too much for people to possibly comprehend? Or is there like a concerted effort to keep it under wraps? So is it natural or is it a conspiracy? What do you guys think?
Well, I think it's like a combination of things. I think, like you said before, I think some people aren't ready for the information. Look at Sonia Rinaldi's one. I mean, that's what's like unbelievable. And yet, you know, if I say something to my friends or my family or anything, they think it's just crackpot work. And, you know, they're not interested because of all the religious dogma or whatever that's been cast upon them, so they can't believe stuff. Just the same goes with the other things. So I think it's a lot of combinations. And when it does work, you know, like you said about remote viewing, I mean, remote viewing was used in World War II and things like that, but nobody talks about it because they think it's woo-woo stuff. But yet we know it works and we know it's there, and it's just bringing it to the forefront. But as time goes on, you think about what metaphysical stuff back 30 years ago and then metaphysical stuff now, how much more acceptable it is to our society, but it still has a ways to go.
Yeah, what I think is, I think something that the remote viewer John Vivanco mentioned was that the fact that people can't process non-materialism is a tactical advantage. So let's say government A has remote viewers to spy on government B. Government B's like scientific cabinet are materialists. They don't believe it's possible, so they don't put funding into remote viewing. And the same is of like Corporation A, Corporation B. So government A then is able to psychically spy and steal all their secrets, and then they don't have, because apparently governments and companies can hire counter remote viewers, and so you could actually hire people to disrupt other people's attempts to remote view into your installation. So in the remote viewing community, it's well known that if you try to spy on Area 51 or places like that, they get blocked. And then sometimes you end up with getting buzzed by like black bands or something. So it's like basically in the remote viewing community, it's off limits. You don't want to try to remote view those locations because they have counter remote viewers set up. But if a corporation or a government, if they have their head in the sand, then they don't even believe it's possible, and then we use that to our advantage. So it almost seems like, because I on one hand I think, well, this is all a conspiracy, but then I sometimes think it's that people are just so badly damaged and brainwashed that, the government could announce that it's all real and then nobody will care. So that's why on the YouTube channel I've been talking about like Luis Elizondo, the UFO guy from the Pentagon, and he's out doing presentations saying UFOs are real, and he has an office in the Pentagon, or at least had one, and still nobody gives a crap because it doesn't, like, I almost feel like Donald Trump could do a press conference and say aliens are real, remote viewing is real, and we can talk to dead people. And people would just be like, Trump loses his mind at a press conference, and that would be the end of the story. I don't know. I don't mean to. I don't mean to be on the soapbox. Anybody have any thoughts about
his
that?
base would probably. I think his base would finally believe in it, so then they'll all be hooray for aliens. Sorry, don't want to get political, but I have to.
Anybody else have any thoughts to share about this subject? I know it's a lot of different subjects being kind of hopped around.
I do find it frustrating. This week we had a big announcement that we actually took a picture of a black hole, and what that really represented was years and years and years of data across multiple sites with 5 petabytes of data and yada 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 and special algorithms to basically image this picture of a black hole. And that is accepted as science. That's accepted. All that time and effort and stuff like that is accepted. Well, we don't really see a black hole. This is just data, a stream of data that everybody at consensus is coming together to is real, right? And yet, all the data that we have on our side, I think there's just as much data on our side, if you will, that would give science, a good equation or whatever you want to call it, make it real. But for some reason, that's considered real, and this is considered woo-woo, like you said. And I think it's a little frustrating that it's been going on well over 120 years.
What do you guys think? This is really left field subject, but we had I wonder what the major cultural forces are, because on one hand we have the Enlightenment, but I also feel like maybe we can throw communism in there as well, because then we had another movement that enveloped geographically half the planet, and it was the same thing. It's basically orthodoxy. These things cannot exist, and so that means within the course of a couple hundred years, we had two massive movements that told society that only physical matter and chemicals are real, and we're all soulless individuals, and life is meaningless. And I wonder, if there's a political ramification behind that. Is it easier to control a population if people think that they're soulless shells made of chemicals? What do you guys think?
I think so. I think that they like to keep us on fear. They don't. Sometimes they don't tell us everything. They maybe they and they don't go and don't do a public announce. It's just a lot of people. The majority of people, they're so in this material. They think that the only things that exist. They're not free thinkers. They're not open mind. They just go. Everybody tell them. On this materialism. So I agree with all else you said about the religion. Everybody's there just to think with their own mind and to see that there is another reality.
Yeah. I'm sorry. Michelle, yeah.
I was just going to say, if you think about the Bible, when in Nicaea in 325 AD, when they went and decided, what was going to be in it, and what was going to be out of it, reincarnation, because they didn't want to, they wanted to put the fear back into religion for people. So, it's on the same basis, sort of.
Right, yeah. And so all that has worked to really block the subject. Now, what I wonder sometimes is what would, we were talking about Oliver Lodge, so what would Oliver Lodge, I wonder what he would think about today looking at the situation, because I think he'd be really pissed off. Because I think he'd look around and be like, wait a second, all this stuff dropped off the face of the earth for 70 years. It came back in the 1970s, 1980s, I guess, kind of with new agey stuff. And really only in the last, I think 30 years, we have the internet now. So we have, people doing seances and physical mediumship again, and people exchanging notes. So, so really it all came back, I think, since the internet age. But I think he'd be really pissed off because there hasn't been any progress. I'm sure he's around. I'm sure some medium, some places, he's talking through. So I'm sure he actually has an opinion. I don't know who. I'm sure somebody out there. But so what do you guys think that how he would feel, and what would the solution be? 120 years, and the arguments haven't changed. Is this a scientific problem, or is this a marketing problem? Is it problem in terms of like philosophy and trying to get people to change their minds, or is it just because the great scientific experiment that's irrefutable has not been conducted yet? What do you guys think?
But I think that there is a little bit progress compared, you know, 100 whatever years ago. There are more science than I see starting to be a little more awakening. There are some, there's still the majority, of course, that they even don't know about all these topics, but there are people that are starting to kind of, see it is not only the only reality. I don't know. I think the little progress probably would be like, expecting more progress, but
Yeah.
I wonder, like, 100 years, where we are going to be now. Like, who knows? There is was this cell phone is going to come out with a cell phone. Then no, it's going to happen, and then
Well, it's kind of the same thing. Like, let's say they come out with a cell phone, and it's just, I mean, people don't process that it's real, and it's just like another paranormal, like like ghost hunters. They have like the little things that beep, and it's just like one of those, and nobody cares, nobody believes it, and nothing happens still. Because I mean, I guess what I'm concerned about is that 1902, they're like, imagine how accepted, like, we'll be living in a different world in 100 years from now when all this is accepted as fact. That's what Lodge was saying. And 100 years later, it was 2002, and
we still like close.
I'm sorry, what's that?
That we still not even close to be accepted.
Right, not even close. And so now it's 2019. We're saying, well, imagine in 100 years. Well, I don't know, because I'm imagining in 100 years, like, unless things really start moving and changing, 100 years from now, it's like we're looking at the same civilization, barely any better, barely any different. So that's where that's why I talk a lot about like this disclosure topic, the idea that there's powers that be that want to change the paradigm of the world, right? So there is research about this. I do believe that it's happening, and I kind of believe it's our only hope, because there has to be a concerted effort from the elite to push the message. If a bunch of world governments came out, and even if it's not related, even if they're talking about, like, let's say, extraterrestrials or remote viewing or something like that, like, that's the domino effect, and that everything else is going to fall. Yeah.
Definitely. Or maybe like some president will come to show on our earth. People, they cannot deny it anymore.
Right. So
open up our, they come on, guys. You guys are not alone in the universe.
Right. Yeah. I mean, basically, if extraterrestrials were disclosed, the afterlife, I predict, 5 years later would be widely recognized, and if remote viewing, which we already is basically disclosed, but if that were like really, really disclosed, I'd say within 10 years it would be like a major paradigm change. So I mean, that's really what it takes. It takes like powers that be. So again, feels a little bit conspiratorial, but I don't know. I'm just going off of some thoughts I had reading up about Lodge here. Let's see. All right, so it's 2:55. Kept going a little bit longer. Anybody else had any thoughts that popped into their minds while I was babbling? No thoughts? Is everybody drawing a blank?
Well, I mean, I kind of agree that it's all the forces combined, plus the powers that be, and controls. I know that sounds conspiratorial, but it's, you think of down through the ages,
Yeah.
different civilizations that reach certain peaks, and what happened. Why didn't they go farther?
Yeah,
It starts up again.
It's difficult not to get conspiratorial almost, because it's just it's a bit too obvious. So it makes you wonder, like, how much the elite knows about this type of subject, and if we can trace that all the way back. What about do you guys ever hear about the Vatican archives? But I guess by show of hands, who here knows about the Vatican archives? You know about them, Corey. Okay, Corey and Michelle. Okay, I can't see your hand, Michelle. You probably know about the Vatican archives. So it's something like, how many kilometers is it? Does anybody know? Isn't it like something ridiculous, like 100 kilometers of hallways?
Yes.
So it's like 100 kilometers of shelves, and nobody knows what's in those shelves. But we do know that it's like ancient records, documents that the Vatican thinks should be kept secret. That's like 100 kilometers of shelving. So that's a really, really large amount of information. There was one guy I was listening to on YouTube. I think it was, who was it? Maybe like Michael Sala or Graham Hancock, or one of these guys, said that what would happen if like 5,000 people got together and invaded Vatican City, because they're the only military forces. They have those Swiss guards, and so they wear the striped outfit. It's like there's like 100 of them. We probably wouldn't be able to stop like 5,000 people coming in saying we're all going to invade the archives and open it up to everybody.
Yeah, it would be nice, instead to keep all the secrets for themselves.
Right.
Yeah.
I think it was Jimmy Church or someone that interviewed someone. Gosh, I don't know if it was John Lear or what's another name of one of those older guys. And he actually got in there and was able to read some stuff. And I can't remember his name.
Really? Do you remember anything about what this person said?
No, just that he saw, he read certain stuff. I read so much stuff and listen to so many videos. But I do remember him saying that, through a connection, he got in there a number of years ago and, read real books that were in there. What he could, the time period he had. Oh, gosh. I'll have to think about his name and who that was.
Yeah, if you can remember that, because that might even be worth a whole class or video on, because, you never know if it's just an anecdote, but, there's obviously people able to go down there. Somebody had to build 100 kilometers of shelving. So, obviously people know. I imagine the Pope does. You'd think of all people, the Pope would have access to his own house. So, that right away shows you there's some, kind of a cover-up going on about something. But yeah, if you find that info, you can maybe post it.
Yeah, definitely.
Interesting. So let's see. We're about coming up on the hour. Maybe we'll wrap up a few minutes earlier just because it's 5 a.m. and I'm socked out here. But does anybody have any more kind of last thoughts about Oliver Lodge, since the articles that I presented, and kind of old beats new, or any other thoughts about some of his ideas? No. Are we all drawing blanks?
I like the older work. I definitely like reading it, and listening to it.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe I'll have more, after this next couple weeks of classes. I'm gonna, I think, keep doing the bios, researching some of these older figures, because, again, the guy's just really smart. We have kind of the fringe scientists today, but we don't have the really cutting edge people coming out and writing, basically fighting against materialism. It's like people are divided. So Dean Radin is Dean Radin, and Dean Radin isn't taken seriously by, for example, will now be the Royal College, or people like Dawkins and whatnot. So it's so divided now. But I guess it was divided back then as well. But all right. Let's see. What else do I want to announce? This might be a good video to put on the YouTube channel. So by a show of hands, does anybody not want this to go online? Like if you're having a bad hair day, or you felt like you need to have makeup put on, in which case I will not put it up. But so does anybody have any objections? Michelle, I can't see your video, so let me know verbally.
Yeah. I'm just gonna keep doing my taxes now.
Oh, you're doing your taxes. Oh, someone's multitasking. If this were a real class with like credit, I'd be like, it's like, is it really appropriate to be doing your taxes while you're attending class, Michelle?
I literally went from work, drove, and now I'm at my other job and doing my taxes.
Oh, you're working as well. And you're doing
I was working, and I was driving while you were talking, and then I'm at my other job and I'm doing my taxes.
Well, you have proven the existence, multi-dimensional existence, haven't you?
Yes, that's what I think I'm doing. And I'm on my phone right now texting somebody.
Oh, so I think you'd be very talented at being in 6 places at once, in other dimensions. So you really have you're proving that right now, because I would melt down trying to do what you're doing.
Well, I was on a thing today. This girl, her name's Clarine, and she says she's a trans silver birch. So now there's all this hoopla about is it real? And
wait, oh really? But she's what? She's reading silver birch. What did you say?
No, she's like 23 years old, and she trances silver birch. Now, if it's the right silver birch, I don't know. She's
23. She's 23 years old. She believes she's channeling silver birch.
That's what they say, and then I was on a thing this morning about it, and
it's
transing something.
Is she single?
I think so.
No, I'm just kidding.
What is that gonna do? No, and they're talking about it now, and now all these different people I'm in the middle of this conversation. I was doing my taxes and listening to you at the same time.
No, if you can find her name, that the point is, it might be fun to interview. There's not many millennials who are into the afterlife subject, let alone, claim to be channeling silver birch. So it's always nice if I can contact young people.
She looks like she's transing something, because her mouth. I don't know. I'll talk about it later.
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, silver birch, could technically still be around, So I'd be very curious if, someone really is channeling silver birch.
Wasn't coming back. Now they're saying that he's not coming back, and oh God. All right, I'm gonna stop talking. Bye.
No, I think that's super interesting. Anyway, I didn't mean to go off on that tangent. But my ears perked up at somebody who's young, involved in afterlife studies, because it's a little bit lonely where I am, I guess, in that regard. Not that you guys aren't young, but I'm millennial age, although 23 is actually, I think, just skipping past millennial. I think that's like Gen Y.
Childhood.
I don't know what Gen Y thinks of these subjects. Well, anyway, anybody doing anything exciting this week?
Nope. Oh, I'm going to the conference in New Orleans. So
what's the conference in New Orleans?
It's Aline Davies. Oh gosh, I can't even say her name. She does trans mediumship, and Scott's going to be there too. So I'll be going to another.
Wow, so this has been the conference circuit, hasn't it? I've never seen this many conferences.
I know. Well, this is different. This is not the We Don't Die thing. It's something different.
But still, it's another afterlife conference, isn't it?
I ain't going anywhere till September. I'm done till September.
Got it.
But anyway.
Anybody else have anything planned? No. Cool. Well, all right. Well, I guess I'm gonna go to bed. Yeah. As always, thanks for supporting. And if I put this on YouTube, then thanks for watching. And you can help that by hitting that subscribe button if you like the conversation, or you can enroll and join the group that you see on the screen at Afterlife University. And yeah, and I guess that's it. Any final closing thoughts or questions before we skedaddle?
Nope.
Okay.
It's kind of little, isn't it?
Well, what's that?
Oh, have a great week.
Okay, cool. All right,
Thanks a
guys.
lot.
Bye.
All right, I'm out of here. See ya.
Bye.
Get some good sleep.